outside of the church, but then also within the church. There's this thing within the church. We often see bitterness from several angles. We see bitterness from congregations against the pastors. We see bitterness from pastors against the congregants, and then we see it, just in the congregation against each other. We see this thing. There's something to be said about holding each other to a standard, but then that's different from being bitter towards one another and saying, you did this the other week, and now I'm holding a grudge against you, and you said this from stage, and I took it wrongly, and you took this out of stage, and so you're a bad pastor. I don't want to go to this church anymore. This is a bad church because of things that people have said. There's this root of bitterness, and so I think that you kind of see this. Like sometimes I think too often, like the church can be almost like a popularity contest, which isn't how it's meant to be. Sort of that the staff is like up here, and the congregation is kind of like here, and it's sort of like there's them and then there's us, and so I was sort of struck with this thing of like pastors and leaders and those things of churches, like they're no better than anybody in the congregation. And it's their fault if they elevate themselves, if they're putting themselves on a stage and saying, "Hey, look at me, and listen to what I have to say, and I am better than you." If they're doing that, then that's absolutely their fault, and that's something that they could get in check. But I think that it's our fault a lot of times, because then we can put them on a pedestal and say, "Okay, we create the separation in the first place," and then that begins to create that bitterness between us. Like, yes, they are held to a higher standard. Biblically, it says pastors are held to a higher standard. But if you treat them differently, and if you think of them with that bitterness in your heart, that's going to be noticeable. That's going to be noticeable within the church, and that's going to be noticeable when the church goes out into the world. That's going to be noticeable to the world. And so I just sort of felt convicted of this thing. I don't think we as a society are as close to God right now as we would probably hope. And I think that bitterness has a lot to do with that. But anyway, so now we'll get into three possible roots that I feel like God kind of gave to me. Certainly not an extensive list of the roots of bitterness, but definitely some good places to start. So the first one is found in Deuteronomy 29:18. And it says, "I am making this covenant with you so that no one among you, no man, woman, clan, or tribe, will turn away from the Lord our God to worship these gods, and so that no root among you bears bitter and poisonous fruit." And so the first one that I have, the first root that I think we see here that this points out is the root of idolatry. And that idolatry breeds this bitterness in us. I think, the more we worship the idols that we've created, the further we get from God, and the more bitter we then get. I mean, you look at the story of the Israelites and the golden calf, and they began to worship idols, and they grew further from God. And the Israelites were known to fight amongst each other. They were known to be bitter towards their leader Moses. They were known sort of throughout the Bible for this thing of bitterness. And even past that, I mean, they were known to wander from God and worship Baal and worship Asherah and worship all these other false idols. And every time you see this clear shift in them. You see this clear thing in how bitterness took root among them and was sort of aimed at their leader. I think we often hear it talked about how our idols are things like our phones and our all this screens and all the thing. And I feel like sometimes, like, especially as a young person, like, it's easy to kind of like roll your eyes at that and be like, yeah, okay, mom, whatever. Yeah, I know, I don't, you don't want me to be on my phone, you don't want me on Instagram, whatever. But like, but then I thought about it, and like, it is it sort of is one of the more bitter places that you can be. Obviously, there are great uses and there are great things that can come of it, but if you're not careful, it can place that root of bitterness in you. Like, again, going back to social media, like that's one of the most bitter places right now, I think, that anyone could really access. And we weren't meant to take in these excessive amounts of